spiral bits are so much better than straight bits. They don't leave a great top edge. You're gonna get tear out in the top. Downside to them is they cause heat and can start a fire. We had a fire this week in the warehouse. It was pretty terrifying. It was because one of my guys used a spiral bit incorrectly and it caused a fire.
Fire started the fire!
But I wanted to put together a video to explain the uses of the different spiral bits, when to use them, how not to use them, what materials they should be used for, and some really good tips and tricks, demos to kind of give you a great overview of how to get the best out of your spiral bits. Now, I may not be the world's foremost expert on spiral bits, but I go through a lot of them. We go through about half a container of plywood a month here, making router tables, box joint jigs, and a lot of templates for other content creators. So these are the bits from the last couple of years. I don't know why I save them, but maybe the sharpening fairy will show up one day and sharpen them for me, and I'll have 1,000 new bits. But just as an example, that's what we go through. So why don't you come on in here and I'll show you kind of why spiral bits are so much better than straight bits. Don't buy straight bits. If you're a beginner, I know they're cheap, but cheap doesn't always mean less expensive. So come on in, let me show you. Very simply, a spiral router bit is taking a shearing cut, very much like a knife slices through meat or this skew block plane goes across end grain. It is taking a shearing cut, meaning it's slicing the wood. This is why a spiral cutter head jointer or planer are much more expensive than their straight knife counterparts, because it leaves a much nicer finish and it uses a lot less energy to make that cut. In fact, here is a clip of a straight router bit versus a spiral cutting side by side. Check out how much more violent this straight bit is. Every time it goes around, it has to scoop that material, it crashes into the material, whereas the spiral cutter head is just taking a slice evenly. It's working down a spiral, which is why a spiral router bit has a far, far, far superior life when treated correctly and used at the right feeds and speeds compared to a straight bit. So I'm gonna just repeat this one more time for you guys. Buy once, cry once. I know it's a consumable, but it really, really makes a difference. Don't buy those cheap straight router bits off Amazon. All right, let's talk about Upcut bits. These are Upcut bits. Very much like a drill bit, they evacuate chips towards your router, whatever the cutting implement is, router table, router, CNC. They don't leave a great top edge. You're gonna get tear out in the top, and you're gonna get a clean edge on the bottom. They're great for through cuts and mortises in hardwood, and we don't use them for plywood. In fact, check this out. This is a slow-mo clip that we have of it just tearing the crap out of that top veneer. There are some special cases, which we'll talk about here in a second in our tips and tricks sections for Upcut bits, but I would really almost use these 95% of the time for hardwoods. So why don't we come into the bench, I'm gonna show you how I use it, kind of talk about some feeds and speeds, and the best use cases for an Upcut bit. Before we can talk about the best use cases for all these bits, we gotta talk a little bit about feeds and speeds. This is a very in-depth subject that has lots and lots of opinions. But one of the biggest, most crucial parts about it are these little dials on every router, right? 1 through 6 usually. You can look up your router, whatever model you have, you can look at the speed chart and you can find out what these numbers are. The most important thing to remember is that a full-size router and a trim router, they are not the same. They're not even close. This goes up to 27,000 RPMs, whereas this one only goes up to 24. The highest setting on this, like I said, is 27, but the lowest is 16,000 RPMs, where it's half of that on this one, 8,000. So you need to know, because feeds and speeds are important. I mentioned briefly kind of in the intro that like people break compression bits because they run them over 18,000 RPMs. A lot of times manufacturers recommend basing all of your feeds and speeds off of 18,000 RPMs and adjusting from there. So it is really important to remember just a few things on this, which is one, you need to turn your trim router down. You should only be running at 27,000 RPMs for the tiniest V bits and like edge profile bits. But when you start to get into removing material, you need to lower that down to 18,000. So for example, on this small guy, 18,000 is between a 2 and a 3. And on the big guy, between a 4 and a 5. So from there, we talk about feed rate, right? Which is usually measured in inches per minute. So an upcut and a downcut bit, a recommended starting point for a 1/4 inch, and I'll put this chart on the screen, is 180 inches per minute, which is 3 inches per second at 18,000 RPMs at a depth that is no more the width of the bit. So if you're using a 1/4 inch bit, you would go no deeper than a 1/4 inch per pass. So 3 inches per second sounds kind of fast, but when you're just taking that little amount of material, you really can kind of go about there. And you can adjust. If you want to go slower, lower the RPMs, but it's a good starting point. 18,000 at 180 inches per minute, which is a chip load of 0.005. I know, don't let me get you into the weeds here. Just remember, lower your RPMs, you'll be fine. So let's talk about use cases, and then for each bit, I'll talk a little bit more about feeds and speeds in each one, but I'll try not to bore you too much. Like I said, you only want to do the depth of the width of your bit, so we're going to do a 1/4 inch time. Easy way to do that with a plunge base is you lower down to the surface of your material, drop down your depth stop here onto this turret, and then turn it. Each one of these steps is a 1/4 inch. So we know we want to go 1/2 inch, so we're going to turn it to here, so when we drop down, you can see that bit's going to drop a 1/4 inch into the material. Now I'm going to use this plywood. You saw that slow-mo clip of why we don't use Upcut and plywood, but I'm going to use this plywood as an example on some ways to overcome that if you have a problem. Now you want to think about grain direction, obviously. The veneer of this plywood, the grain runs this way. So if we go across the grain, which I'll show you here, we're going to get terrible results, and you can see that now. In fact, I don't know if you can hear this. I'm going to tell you the speed difference between full speed, which I know most of you are already doing, and lowering it down to a 3, right? So here's full speed on these routers, and this is lowered down to a 3. So you could even go down to a 2.5, 2, which would be the ideal place to run your router bit. So I'm going to run this with my edge guide here. Okay, you can see here, when we exited the cut, we had tear out, so you can put a sacrificial board right here. If you're gonna go all the way through, that is a great way to stop that. And then you can see the rest of this cut has tear out, because we're going across the grain, big chunks out. So this is a time when you would wanna use a down cut bit. So let's talk about mortises. I'm gonna show you some hardwood. In fact, if you look at this hole, this is one where we do on the CNC. This is one of the few times I do use an upcut to cut a 1/4 inch hole. And you can see I take a V-bit and I do a chamfer before we ever use the upcut bit on the hole, so that way it has nothing to tear out. There's nothing for it to grab on and split the veneers. So that's the way we do it on the CNC. If you're a CNC person, you can do a chamfer first and then do your hole with an upcut. Before we get to mortises, sorry, I skipped over it. How do we fix this problem if we have to go across the grain with an upcut bit, right? So first, here's a little trick. You can use your combo square, which by the way, these are the PEC squares we carry. And you know these videos are supported only by people like you visiting our website. We don't take sponsorships here, so we really appreciate your patronage. And if you find value out of this video, I'll link all the tools we use down below. So we take our square like that, and then we just take our marking gauge, set it right like that, and then we take it, and I'm gonna do 1/2 and 1/2 here. We're gonna do blue tape and marking gauge. I'm gonna do marking gauge for half this, and then we'll put some blue tape here, and I'll overlap them a little bit so you can see what that looks like. Okay, so you can see tape worked pretty well. It's obviously much, much cleaner on this marking gauge side. You can see opposite the marking gauge, we got some fuzz here, which would be our offcut side. It came out great. Tape works in a pinch. We still got our tear out at the end here, so you would want some backer board there. But let's go ahead and talk about some mortises. Okay, now for a mortise, this is where a marking knife is your friend. So we're gonna create a start and a stop point, and you can go all the way across the board if you want, but you're gonna have a little bit more sanding to do at the end of your project. And I'm gonna make this one about 3 inches long because that is about the speed in which you would wanna go in 1 second. So just to give you an idea of how long that is, 1/1000. It's a lot slower than you think. So we're gonna mark out our mortise. Usually with a mortise, you're gonna come back with a chisel and clean it up. Sometimes people try and fit their mortises to exact width router bit, which is where like a 1/2 inch bit comes in great, or 3/8. If you wanna see exactly how wide your router bit is and be able to set something to it, you just lower it down to your material, not too hard. You don't want to press down, you just want to scrape it just a little bit, just like that. That's going to tell you exactly how wide everything is. So you can take your marking gauge and set it right there. Same thing over here. These marking gauges are great because you can micro adjust them. We're going to mark out our mortise, and we're gonna go down a 1/4 inch at a time. And here's tip number 2, is like, how do you know how to stop? It's like really hard to do when you got a router spinning and to hit that line exactly. So the way I like to do this is, you know, with this base, it makes it really easy, the tamar jig, because we'll have it right there. And I'm just gonna go right to the end of my mortise, make sure the end of the flute is right there. I'm just gonna take some of the other accessories that come with this, and we're just gonna create a stop for ourselves. So we'll just verify, just like that. Same thing on the back here. Okay, let's cut this thing a 1/4 inch at a time, starting with our turret depth stop. So there we go. Absolutely perfect mortise, no tear out, ends right at our lines, goes right to our marking gauge lines. And if you were using a bigger bit or you wanted this to be wider, you could just move your edge guide over and keep repeating that. You would just want to make sure that if your stops were angled, that you adjusted them correctly. But otherwise, that's perfect. And if you were using a 1/2 inch or 3/8 inch bit, you could go all the way through. I would recommend, if you're going to do a through cut, the one spot you might get tear out is where you first plunge through. The rest of the cut will be super clean. So you could put some tape or a backer board down there. Those are kind of the use cases for an upcut. Let's talk about downcut bits. These are downcut bits, and they do the exact opposite of an upcut, which is they push chips into the cut that you're cutting, which makes them great for leaving a super clean top edge on whatever you're cutting. You have to run them slower than upcut bits because of that extra resistant from the sawdust, but they're our second most used bits behind compression bits. They're incredible for clearing out large areas of material. If we have something like the router table where we stick the plate in there, we cruise through that with a 1/2 inch bit. With our big CNCs, we can crush that real fast. The downside to them is they cause heat, right? You push in sawdust into your cut, that causes heat and can start a fire. I'm gonna take you back there and show you how we did it here in just a second. That means that you can't do real deep enclosed cuts. Like you can't do a through mortise with one of these because as you step down, you're gonna be pushing chips in the material. It's cause heat and friction, which is the enemy of sharpness, and again, can cause a fire. Downcut is great for shallow grooves, mortises, dados. You don't want to go deeper than the width of the bit, especially in one pass without clearing out some of those chips. All right, like I said, the 1/2 inch is the VIP around here. We use it so much on our CNC, lots of clearing operations, and it's a bit we go through the most of. It's great because with plywood especially, you're getting a clean edge on the top, which is obviously where you're entering from, and so it makes a big difference. Cross grain, long grain, doesn't matter. The only thing it's not great for is through cuts all the way, but dados, rabbet screws, all that stuff, that's what I'm gonna reach for first. Feeds and speeds are the same for the upcut bit, which is 180 inches per minute at 18,000 RPMs. Same thing with the 1/2 inch, it's 200 inches per minute at 18,000 RPMs. But the difference being is that you can go a 1/2 inch deep now because it's a 1/2 inch wide, you can go a 1/2 inch deep. So big difference in depth and the amount of material you can remove. So let me show you a cross grain cut here on plywood, why it's so great for that, and then we'll show you a couple quick hardwood cuts. Okay, as you can see, two really nice clean edges. We got a little tear out back here. You kind of want a backer board for that, but nice clean bottom, looks incredible. Check this out, the 3-flute down cut, pretty cool. Brief plug for my boys just because I love their bits so much. Bits and Bits is great. We use them exclusively on our CNCs. We even tried switching and went right back because these really do last longer than anything we've ever seen. So let's move on to hardwood and let me show you why you wouldn't use a down cut for a mortise. So like I said before, these are fantastic for rabbets, dados, and grooves. So if I'm cleaning up the edge of this, it's gonna work really well. So, perfect clean. I don't know why I'm not using a vacuum. One of the coolest thing about these DeWalt plunge bases is you can hook a vacuum up to it, which I don't know why I don't have that hooked up, but I digress. So let me show you what happens when you do a mortise with a down cut, and it is not pretty. So as you can see here, we've got an actual fire. See that? Or embers, I guess. And that's because it's shoving all the dust down in the hole and spinning, and it causes so much heat and friction. Sawdust is really, really easy to ignite, and that's how you get a fire. And that's how we got a fire in our warehouse. So let me take you back there and tell you a little quick story as a cautionary tale for you. So we were cutting sled kits just like this one, and you know, we got slammed for Black Friday. I went through a whole container of Baltic birch in about 20, 25 days. We were going through bits, and so we were trying to make them last longer. We probably should have changed the downcut bit, and it was dull, and it created an ember, which it sucked up into the machine. That normally wouldn't even be an issue because it's gonna suck it over into the buckets, it's gonna go down and be buried by sawdust, and it's gonna not have enough oxygen to start a fire. But our problem was we had a clog up there. The HVAC guy that installed this used self-tapping lath screws about 1 inch long, so it's like a shark's mouth in there. So sometimes you get little frays and things like that, and they catch on the screws. And that built up, and we did not do enough maintenance because we were so busy, and we made a mistake. So you can see the top of this pipe is black. That's where the fire started, but the dust collector sucked it down the tube. And we never put in access doors into this system, and so we really had no way. You can see in this clip here, we're kind of all just trying to push it down the tube so we can get to a place where we can actually put it out. It was real scary, and it took us about an hour to put out. We went through a couple fire extinguishers because we would get it out and then it would reignite. It was rough, but we got to put out. We learned our lesson. We're going to replace all the screws with rivets. We're going to put in access doors into this pipe, so if we get a clog, it's easy to get out, or forbid we have another fire, we have a way to get to it and be able to put it out quickly. So you can learn from my mistakes, and let's go talk about compression bits. These are compression bits. This is our most used bit. But it's because of how we use them that we can use them so much. The drawback to them is they're more expensive. You have to run them slower. Manufacturers, Bits and Bits only recommends 18,000 RPMs max. They snap a lot more often than regular bits. I always feel so bad when I get a customer service email like, oh, I used my bit for the first time and I snapped it. And it's because they tried to take a massive cut at way too fast of an RPM and it just snaps the shank because there's so many forces. Part of the reason that people take big cuts at fast speeds when they first get them is you have to be deeper than your upcut portion of your flutes to have like the desired effect. Otherwise, it's just an upcut bit if you only go, you know, 1/8 of an inch in, and you get all the downsides to an upcut bit and none of the upsides to the downcut portion. In addition to all those precautions you have to take when using them, they're really great for finishing cuts. They're also fantastic for laminates like plywood and MDF. In MDF, we can crank through material, like full passes on 3/4 inch material on our CNCs at like 900 inches per minute, which we have big CNCs. But it's important to remember that these are great for finishing cuts. A lot of times, you know, we talked about how down cuts can only be like used for shallower cuts. Is we'll clear out a bunch of material with a down cut, gives us that really nice clean edge, and then we'll come back and finish the cut with a compression bit. Let's talk about some tips, tricks, feeds and speeds, and how to use these compression bits correctly. All right, so these are compression bits. These are ones with bearings, which God do I love for templates. I mean, these are just amazing. And then these are ones that are just straight compression bits. Now, these have a bunch of caveats to them. So the thinner one, the 1/4 inch, you actually run a lot slower than the 1/4 inch up and down cut. This one is 110 inches per minute at 18,000 RPMs, where the up and down cut is 180. And that's because there are so many forces at play here. It's pulling up, it's pulling down. You also have to make sure that you are deeper than the upcut flute, otherwise you lose any benefit, right? Like if you're not deeper than the upcuts and into the downcut portion, you basically are just using an upcut bit. But this is where things are a little bit different. When you get into the 3/8 and 1/2 inch, you actually run these faster than their up and downcut counterparts, and that's because they're much more rigid and you need to move faster on a CNC, for example, to really get the benefits of it. That being said, you really need a powerful router to run a compression bit if you are holding it by hand. They work great on a router table and you know, if you have a full-size router, but you start to use these 1/4 inch compression bits and they snap a lot in a handheld router because they want to, you know, move, and you get a little flex in them. Everything has deflection. The harder they are, the better they are at cutting, but the harder they are, the more brittle they become. Not to get crazy in the weeds here. The way we use compression bits is finishing passes. So on the CNC, for anything MDF, we'll just use a compression bit and we do a full depth pass minus 0.005. So we'll leave an onion skin and then we come back around and finish it up. With plywood, part of the problem is when you plunge into the material, it's going to rip that first veneer. So you need to set ramps that enter outside of this and get it deeper than these upcut flutes. And then come in to cut. So, you know, a lot of times like I was talking about on the vacuum table, to keep the suction, we'll start with a downcut bit and then we'll come back and do a finishing pass with the compression. All this changes when you get to templates. With templates, you're already removing most of your material and you're taking a final pass with a router bit that has a bearing. Now, this is where compression just excels because you're taking a small pass on the side, and these are absolutely fantastic at getting both the clean top and bottom edge. That being said, your template is sort of like a zero clearance. So, you know, if you're riding on your template and you're using a downcut bearing guided bit, you're actually going to get 2 good edges as well. So I personally only use compression bits for template routing, and then I like to use these on the router table. I feel like it's a lot more rigid and I get a lot better results. And again, I'm never doing mortises because you're going to have the same problem you have with the downcut bits, which is all the downcut is pushing chips into the hole and the tiny upcut portion is really doing nothing. So I think that sometimes people go, oh, why would I buy an upcut or a downcut bit when I can get one with both? There's no reason, but you're just gonna ruin these bits. These 1/4 inch bits, if you run them faster than 18,000 RPMs, love to snap. And these, you just have to run so fast to get great results that you just need to make sure you're using them correctly and not removing a ton of material. Great finishing bits, not great hogging out material bits. So there's not really much to show you on a cut. I have some slow-mo here that I'll show you of it getting both the top and bottom edge of a piece of plywood. This is a beautiful clip and it looks just so cool how it works. So let's talk about some final sort of tips and tricks for spiral router bits that are going to give you the best results. Okay, a little final tips and tricks. Stickout, I didn't mention that. You want to be no more than a 16th or an 1/8 of an inch below the end of the flute. These bits are great because the heat coating just goes right to where you want it to be. You should not be pulling your bit out of the collet further and further to get deeper in something. The forces are so strong on a bit. In fact, look at this clip of this kickback we caught. People love to say like, oh, you weren't even touching the bit when it kicked back. No, this is like 1/1000th of a second, this whole clip. And look how much that bit is moving. That is a 1/2 inch shank, huge flush trim bit that is kicking like that. And so forces are way more than you can comprehend. And if you lengthen your bit, it's just gonna deflect a lot and you're gonna get terrible results. Router direction. Now, I have a whole video on this, I'll link below, but there is an arrow on the base of every single router, and that's telling you the direction the bit is spinning. So if you're on the outside of a piece, you're going counterclockwise, and on the inside, you're going clockwise. You can get more in depth than that. I'll link the video if you want to learn more about that, but it is important. Burning. Burning is caused by two things: dull bit or wrong bit for the application. You saw burning, we can cause a fire with a downcut, but dull bits are often the culprit. And so again, I'm gonna repeat myself, speed. Adjust that speed, slow your router down. Google what the numbers mean and keep it down around that 18,000 mark for spiral bits. Heat is the enemy of sharpness. I've been saying that for years, and you are shortening the lifespan of your very expensive router bits by running them too fast. Chatter marks. Chatter marks are poor work holding, so your board isn't secured or your router's moving around because you're trying to take too much material, take too big of a pass. So make sure that you have a good setup, you plan ahead when you are making your cuts, and of course your workpiece is very well secured to your workbench. Tear out, obviously we talked about that. That's the wrong bit for the wrong application, but you can use marking knife, marking gauge, and blue tape. And I think that's it, and I wanna say thank you. It is 2025. I'm so excited to be here. I'm happy to be making content again. We had a busy year last year, and that's because of supportive viewers like you. We exist solely on you coming to our website and checking out the amazing creations that we have and all the great tools that we've invented and carry from amazing manufacturers, because if it's in my store, it is in my shop, I guarantee it. So thank you for your support. I can't be more excited about what's to come in 2025. We have 8 product releases in the next 10 months. We filed a bunch of patents last year that, oh boy, do I have some cool stuff coming. I can't wait to show you. So guys, thank you for watching. Stay safe in the shop.